Hello everybody, and you're welcome to Python Made Simple series. In today's lesson, we'll be looking at lists, indexing items in a list. We'll be looking at empty list and its importance. We'll go further to touch on list operations, that is addition, multiplication, reassigning items and lists. We'll look at the in operator and the not operator. Then we'll climax this whole lesson with list functions. We'll be looking at append, len, insert, max, min, count, remove, and reverse. So stay tuned. Let's get moving. Okay. So first of all, we would like to know what a list is. So in Python, a list is used to store items. I'm not talking about the list you prepare when you are going to the market. Even with that, it's more of like some storage, something you are doing where you try to remember the things you need when you get to wherever you are going. So a list in Python is used to store items. Now it can be created by using two square brackets with what you want to store put within these brackets and separated with commas. So for example, I want to create a list of items I want to buy in the market. So this is my shopping list. So I'll need some rice, some beans. Okay, because these are strings, I'll need to use my quotes. You can use single quotes anyway, but I prefer and enjoy using my what else again? Rice, beans, yam. Okay, so let's just use this three. Okay, now this is how you create a list. You assign it to a variable, then the items you wish to store, if it's a string, you include them in the parentheses, then you separate them using a comma. So now let's call on markets and see what happens. So this is the list we created. Now, an item in a list can be called by indexing. So every item has been assigned an index. And in Python, indexing in Python, it starts with the number 0. So we have rice, beans with 0, beans being 1, and yam being 2. So if we want to call upon rice, so using the print statement, we say, okay, search inside the market list and bring me the item stored in index 0. So it brings out the items stored in index 0. So let's try that for the remaining items. So search in the market list and bring in the items stored in index 2. Now let's try index 3 and see what Python gives us. So it's an error because it's out of range. We've gone out of range. So always remember that the first item on a list always have an index of 0. Now let's move on to an empty list. An empty list can simply be created by using a pair of square brackets, empty pair of square brackets. So let's create an empty list. Simple. This is an empty list. So let's call on this empty list and see what Python gives us. And let's call list. Now this empty list is very useful when programming. Yeah, there are times where you require the user to input some information or to add some data to what you require, and when the user happens to input this information, it is always stored in an empty list you've created in your program. Now, that's all with empty lists. So now it's possible to have a list of different items. It's not a must that a list should be all numbers, all strings, or that. A list could even be numbers, strings, and even a variable you've stored a value under. So let's say that we are assigning the number tree to num, and we are creating a list called items. Okay, using my square brackets. So let's say boy is 0, and even a list can contain another list. So let's add another list in it and say 1, 6, and so okay, num, and come outside and okay, so let's say 3.24, 23. Okay, that's cool. So let's call on using the print function. Let's see. So this is our list. So we can index these items we've stored in our list by using the print statement and telling Python to look inside the items list and fetch you what you've stored in index 0. It brings you boy. Now we can also tell Python that, hey Python, look into items list. Now within the items list, there's a list in it, and that list has index 2. Now within that list, go in and fetch me num. Go in and fetch me 2. That's so it prints 3, which is the value stored under the variable none. So that is it. Now indexing can be conducted on strings too. Strings in Python are assigned indexes, just like when you write a text or a word in Python, each letter of that word is assigned an index. So let's say, for example, string being equal to hello world. So if we tell Python to print to go into string and print what I have stored or what has been stored in index 4, in index 4, then you have O from the word hello. Okay, so next we'll be looking at list operations. So multiplication, additions can be performed on lists. So with addition, you have 2 lists and you are putting the items together. It doesn't add the individual items in the list. It just puts them together and I'll arranges them in an ascending order. So for this example, for instance, odd has 3579, even has 2468. So using the print statement, if we add these two lists, it writes out the items of these two lists, but in an ascending order. Now we could also have, so let's say num one, two, three. And we say num for, okay, so let's say 3, 4, 5. So if we print num plus num, it brings them together, arranges them from the lowest to the highest. Now we can also perform multiplication on our lists. So let's say num by 3. So it just repeats the lists num, which is 1, 2, 3, 3 times. So we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So reassigning items in a list. Now there are times when you create a list and you realize that the items in the list are not what you really want, and instead of recreating another one, the ideal thing will be to just reassign those items in the list. So let's clear the values we've stored under num and reassign these. So let's say 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, so we are saying that Python should go into the list num and index 2 and assign the new number 10 to that index. So when we print num again, we realize that the item 6 in the list num has been replaced with the number 10. So that's just simple. You use the list in square brackets, its index, and the new assignment you want to do. Okay, so moving on to the in operator. Usually the in operator is used to check if an item is in a list. It returns to true if the item is in the list and false if it is not. So let's say the variable words, for example, and let's store these items in it. So let's say x table okay, let's say a bin and a chair. Right, so we have a list like this. So now we want to, using the print statement, check if the variable x in words, then it returns to true. Now let's also check if the variable span is in words, and it returns to false. So that's just a very simple use of the in operator. And cool, let's try this other example. So creating a list So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we have our lists. Okay, so I want num index 5. So I want Python to check what I've stored in index 5 and assign it to what I've stored in index 1, in index 0, plus what I've stored in index 1. Now, when it is done doing that, if, using the if statement, if 11 and nums okay, so just a minute. Okay, so if 11 and nums and num should print yes, else should print no. So let's run this. Okay, so my yes hasn't really been defined, sorry. So if 11 is a num, so we are saying it should go to index 5. So index 5 is the number 10. And it should reassign it to index 0, which is 5, plus index 1, which is 6. So that will be 11. So now I want it to print we have it there. So it has done the addition, and at the end it has given us what we've stored in index 5. Okay, so next we'll look at the not operator. With regards to the not operator, it's used to check if an item is not in a list. Okay, so using our nums, let's call on num. Okay, it's still intact, okay, except that 10 is now 11. Okay, so using the print statement, we can go this way, not for in num, and it's true. Or we can also use this for not and num. So either way works. So it prints out true if what you are checking for is really not in the list, and false if it is in the list. Now we move on to our list functions, and first on that particular agenda we have the append method. Now what does the append method do? The append method adds an item to the end of an existing list. So when you use the append method, you just add an item to the existing list. So let's create a list called nums. So let's say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay. Now, using the append method, it is used like this. So the list with a full stop, then append, and what you want to put at the end of the list, then you enter. So using the print statement, let's check if it has been applied, and yes, it has been applied. We can also try that with this. So let's say words, okay, and let's create a list. So this is an example with strings called hello. Now using the append method, we say words dot append, then we have our world. So let's print words and see. So we have hello world. Now we move on to our len function. So the len function is usually used to check the length of a list, so the number of items in a list. So for example, let's call on our nums function, our nums list, and using the len function, let's ask Python to print us the length of nums. Okay, it's not complete. Okay, and we have 7. So it has counted the items in the list and has given us a result. But one thing you should take note is that unlike indexing of items in a list, the len function does not start from 0. It starts with 1 when counting. So if you realize, if we use the index function to check the index of, let's say, 5 in the list, we don't get 1, we get 0. But using the len function to check the number of items, it starts counting from 1. Okay, so let's try this other example and see. So let's go to letters, a variable called letters, then stored in a list. So we have E, F, G. Okay, so let's say this is okay. So using the append method, so let's tell Python to add H to the end of the list letters. Okay, so when it's done, it should print that so that we see. Okay, we have that. So now let's check the length of our, and we have that 4. Okay, so next let's look at the insert method. So unlike the append method, they are kind of similar, but with the insert method, it takes 2 arguments. It first of all takes the index of the item in the list, and the second argument is what you want to insert. So the insert method is used to put or insert any item at any position in a list. With the append, it is always at the end of the list, but with the insert, any position of the list. So trying this example, let's say Python simple. Okay, so now let's use this first approach, then I show you another approach. So let's say index being equal to 1, we do word dot insert index, comma, then what we want to put, then let's print word. So Python made simple. Another option is just to, instead of making reference to the index, we could just go ahead and say, okay, word dot insert the first argument, which is the index. So the index is 1, so we put 1, comma, then made. So if we print word, okay, so I should have undone what I did. So it has added made to the original, the already existing list we made alterations to. So I think that is clear for now. So let's try that with some numbers to have a feel of how it works from both ends. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's say nums dot append. So it adds 5 to the end of this list, but then we want it to do nums dot insert. So index 3, it should insert 3.5. So if we print nums, we have 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 4, 5 onwards. Okay, so next let's look at the index method in list. So indexing just helps us tell the position of an item in a list. But with the index method, it finds out the first occurrence of a list items and returns its index. It finds out the first occurrence of a list item and returns its index. Okay, so let's see words. So X spam. Okay, let's say fun. So using the index method, we say print. So you should go into words and check the index of the word span and return that to us. So when it does that, its index is 1. So let's look at max into brackets. So now the max into the max method returns the item in a list with the maximum value. So let's create another variable. Let's just keep creating so that we get used to creating our list and getting used to all these. So let's say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so this will be it will be a bit straightforward. So okay, so let's say 4, 3, 45, 32, 12, and say 45 again, and then okay, and this. So with the max method, it brings out the maximum value in the list. So let's say print. Python should print the max in the list nums. So the greatest value or the maximum value there is 57. Now, just like maximum, we have minimum, and we can ask Python. So let's call our nums to come back. So print the min in nums, and the minimum value there is 3. Now there's another function or method, which is the count method in Python. Now the count method returns how many times an item occurs in a list. So with the count method, it's like we are counting the number of times a number has appeared in a list. So for example, let's call our nums so that it will be immediately above us. So using the print statement, print our sets, our list, dot count, and should check how many times the number 45 has occurred, and you realize that it has occurred 2 times. You can also use that with another number, which nums.count, so 57, and it appears once. Now there's also another method called a remove method. Now after we've created most of these lists and put some items in, there are times when we want to take some items out of the list, and instead of recreating the list all over again, you can simply use the remove method. So now the remove method works like this. So let's say we want to take out the number 3. So using the print statement, Python should go into the list nums and remove the number 3. Okay, just a minute. So it's done. I shouldn't have used the print nums.remove, so it wouldn't give me anything. What I should have done was nums.remove 5, and then tell Python to print nums, and we have our list without the 5. Now there are times when you want to reverse the arrangement of items in a list. So instead of that particular item being first, you reverse it and it starts from the last number backwards to the first number. So using the reverse method, we can say, okay, let's call back nums and tell Python to go into nums and reverse it. So print nums, and we have the items in the original nums list being reversed. You can use that alongside a print statement all together. So you're telling Python to print out reverse of the nums list. Still gives us, okay, so let's just print that out. That's taking it back to the original list. So we are done for today. Thank you very much for your time. I hope to see you next week. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment. Your comments are very helpful. It guides and keeps me on track most of the times. So thank you very much for your time. You have a wonderful week. Bye bye.